Kernan, and I'm Head of Engagement at Highland Reserves Forces and Cadets Association, abbreviated, you'll be glad to know, to Head Eng at the RIFCA. We're headquartered in Dundee, but we cover all of the north of Scotland from and including the Central Belt right up to Orkney and Shetland. It's a very large patch for us to get across. There are 13 Reserve Forces and Cadets Association in the UK, 2 of them in Scotland. And our job really is to be the interface between defence and business, is perhaps the simplest way of putting it. We focus primarily on support for reservists and their employers, and we have worked with many of you logging in today during the recent COVID mobilisation, for example. It's nice to see some familiar faces on here today. And reservists are sometimes known as twice the citizen. This is because they hold down 2 jobs. They have the job that they have with you as their civilian employers, and they have the job that they have with the Ministry of Defence as reservists, and that's primarily conducted in their own time. So they're very committed citizens and very worthwhile people to have on board. But what has this got to do with Chambers of Commerce, and what is Chamber Force? Let me explain. In a previous life, before I worked for the RIFCA, I was Chief Executive of Forth Valley Chamber of Commerce. And like most of the chambers here, and many of you here, we supported defence in a rather ad hoc way, as and when we could. But I always felt there was more to be gained by businesses from working more closely with defence. And while I was pondering this, at the same time, the then commander of 51 Brigade in Stirling, Brigadier Harkness, was having similar thoughts as to how defence could get more out of partnering with business. So when our paths first crossed, I think about 7 or 8 years ago now, there was a meeting of minds straight away. So Chamber Force was born from a desire to strengthen the partnerships between Chambers of Commerce and the military to mutual benefit, and mutual is key. And one of the important features of Chamber Force is that it has a buddy system. And each participating chamber has its own military buddy allocated from usually a unit or a regiment nearby. These buddies work behind the wire, but they work with their chamber to sort of translate military terminology, to learn more about the needs of the business community, to support their reservists and veterans in the workplace, and to deliver military-style training and challenges to employers and to their staff. And this is always very, very popular. The inaugural chamber stretch took place in 2019 with Dundee and Angus Chamber, partnered with 225 MedReg in Dundee, who are their buddies. And we had a whole host of businesses taking part in all sorts of challenges in the Slessor Gardens in the sunshine. It was tremendous fun. My only complaint was that the RIFCA team, my team, only came 3rd. I suspect some skullduggery in the marking, and I'm looking at you, I hope, Alison Henderson, to blame for that one. We'd hoped to have a few of our buddies with us here today. Unfortunately, some of them have other things on, as the military tend to. But I think we have Captain Alan McEwen with us from Seven Scots. He's logged in today, so he'll be around to help with questions as well. So through the activities of Chamber Force, many employers became aware that the skills they were looking for in potential employees, such as leadership, which we're going to hear about more today, teamwork, good work ethic, able to work under pressure, rise to challenges, all of these things are embedded in military personnel. And that was where the interest grew that we could assist employers to attract and retain reservists and other military personnel onto the workforce to bring these advantages. As employers supported to defence, these employers then gained some of the other benefits that we can offer back to you, because it has to be a two-way relationship. So we can offer our supportive employers teamwork, leadership training, as we've mentioned, access to senior military and government briefings, which are always very useful, invitations to key networking events, such as gun salutes and the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, fingers crossed for this year, and access to supply chain portals to what is the biggest employer in the UK. Employers then joined the Employer Recognition Scheme and achieve bronze, silver or gold status, depending how far they've progressed through the programme. And these all have associated benefits as well. I'm about to introduce one of our gold holders in Amazon, sponsors of today's event. But before I do, I'd just like to highlight my 2 REEDs, which stands for Regional Employer Engagement Directors, because we like our acronyms as a quasi-military organisation. So Roy McClellan and Major Ray Watt. Ray is a serving reservist with 154 Logistics in Dunfermline. Roy can't be with us today, but Ray is here, and he will also be able to help with questions and anything that you want to know about the Employer Recognition Scheme. His contact details and Roy's will be on the slide at the end. So a brief intro. Sorry?
Morning, everybody.
So a brief introduction from me, coming to an end. So I would now like to pass over to Jamie Strain, who is representing the sponsors of the event, Amazon. Amazon are gold ERS holders at national level and employ many reservists and veterans across the organisation. Jamie is the site lead at the fulfilment centre in Dunfermline, having previously been the senior operations manager. So over to you, Jamie.
Hi, good morning, guys. Pleasure to meet you all. Thanks for the introduction, Michelle. Appreciate it. First of all, just to sort of say, I'm absolutely delighted to be attending the Chamber Force event today on behalf of Amazon. And I thank you all for the invite. And thanks to Alan and his team for inviting us along. It's an absolute privilege to be here. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to listening to all the great insights that we're going to learn from Paul this morning. So thank you for that. The event itself, for me, is hugely important for a number of reasons. And as an employer who actively recruits ex-military personnel, we're absolutely delighted to be part of it. And when I was talking to my team about this over the last couple of weeks, so we're absolutely keen that I take back some of the learnings from today and how we can further develop and support this as a business locally and more nationally. And as you know, any business is absolutely nothing without its people, and great people make great business. And in my experience, ex-military personnel and employees deliver a fantastic job when they come into employment. Our Amazon Fulfilment Centre in Dunfermline and across the UK, we pride ourselves on leading a strong programme of attracting ex-military personnel for a vast number of roles across the Amazon estate, which includes fulfilment, which is the area of the business that I work in, AMZL, which is our transportation and our ATS networks across the UK. Now, in ex-military personnel, my experience tells me that you can guarantee the following. You can guarantee a strong work ethic, which I think, Michelle, you've already said, great attention to detail. They're super curious to learn and develop within the business. They add tremendous life experience, which I value in my team hugely. And they bring absolute high levels of loyalty to a team. And they provide a very inclusive environment for others to learn from their experiences as well. That's just a number or some of the key attributes that I've seen in my experience. And when I was preparing for today's session, I was thinking about my own team and how over the last couple of years, as I've worked in the Dunfermline site, what we've learned and what we've taken from that talent that we've attracted from the ex-military personnel. And I think over the last 12 or 14 months or so, through the COVID pandemic, that skill set, or those skill sets that I've just described, have been absolutely the bedrock of our operation. And it's enabled us, in actual fact, to deliver for our customers and our people at a very high standard. And those individuals who work with us from an ex-military background have added significant value to our business. I'm super excited to be here today. I'm super excited and looking forward to our speaker, Paul, this morning. I've heard great things, Paul, so I'm thoroughly looking forward to listening to the stories and all the experience that you have to share. And I'll use that as a learning experience as well, which is great. And before I pass back to Michelle, I just want to say a final word of thanks to Alan for his invitation to the event today and for his team. I think over the last couple of years, Alan, I think we've done some really good things together. I've thoroughly enjoyed the working relationship and the partnership, and I hope that continues. And thanks for bringing us all together to deliver this across a number of the chambers. So thank you very much indeed, and I'm looking forward to our session. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, everything froze for a moment there. I think I'm back again. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, today, Brigadier Paul Harkness. I'm not going to attempt to go through his extensive biography with you, which you will have all seen in the meeting brief. I think suffice to say he has a bit of leadership experience. As I mentioned, I first worked with Brigadier Paul several years ago, and I was Chief Executive at Forth Valley Chamber of Commerce, and he eventually became a non-exec director on the board. So he has quite extensive experience of chambers and the work that you do. He was also instrumental in setting up Chamber Force and continues to follow it closely. Brigadier Paul is currently out in the Middle East and being a couple of hours ahead, and on his day off is letting us intrude on his weekend. So over to you, Paul, and we'll look forward to what you've got to say.
Michelle, thank you very much indeed. And Alan and Jamie, thank you also. I thought to kick off with, I would look at leadership. And of course, leadership is one of those subjects which there are a lot of books written. In fact, you can ask Amazon, they will have stocks of them. So the Countess books will give you all the principles. They're being written by people who are either psychologists, or they are behavioral scientists, or one or two are actually written by people who are or have been genuine leaders, but it tends to be a very modest reflection on their life. But you can learn the principles. But the true essence of leadership comes from within. And my experience of that is coming across people who have developed that inner innate quality that has brought them to the fore to become a leader. I do believe that everyone has the potential to be a leader. You can teach them the principles, but how it is applied is something that's very different. And there isn't a silver bullet that resolves any of this, or that will give you that kind of that je ne sais quoi quality that makes you a leader. You either have it or you have to work hard to develop it. And every situation requires a slightly different kind of leader. We will all think back to that person who we were at school with or at university with, who was captain of the football team or captain of the rugby team. They're the ones who always had the best looking girlfriends, apparently, according to Hollywood films. It was a different kind of quality of leadership. Ask yourself now, where are those people today? And have they taken the skills of leadership in sport to the business community, or for in our case into the military? And it's very interesting because the innate quality remains there, but the ability to do it in another environment does not necessarily occur. So the qualities of leadership can be varied, and they can be environmental and circumstance driven. And that, I would again say that leadership at a junior level, certainly in the military, does not necessarily guarantee leadership at a senior level. I have come across, I worked for a general who had the brain the size of a planet. He was extraordinary, hugely capable. He was never regarded as a very good leader when he was a young officer. What he had was the ability to lead at a very senior level, and vice versa. I've come across people who have been brilliant at a junior level, but somehow they can't quite get it together to do it at a higher level. So we all have our own culminating point, as we would say in the military, a point you reach where actually you've gone as far as you can. But there are, of course, people who go the whole way. If we were to look at someone like Jeff Bezos with Amazon as the sponsor, he's one of those people who has driven forward his business in a way that has let it develop into so many new avenues. Where the military are different is it takes its management team from university, mostly. In the Army, I think it's about 80% are graduates. And it takes its managers, the people who wants to run the business. And the Army is like a business. We just don't make a profit. In fact, we make a loss the whole time. But you take your managers and you, having graduated from university, and then you spend a year, you isolate them for a year, where you teach them, first of all, how to do the job of being a soldier. So they are taught how to work on the production line, how to work on the shop floor, so that They understand all that's required about being a soldier. So the same training that their soldiers are getting, they are also getting. You then teach them how to manage the business at the level that they will be starting at. And then you teach them how to lead. And that is the critical difference. It's all about teaching people how to lead, that leadership quality. Hence the motto at Sandhurst is serve to lead. There are very few organizations that take their people, their new employees, and take them away for a year and then train them, not only how to do the business and how to manage it, but how to be a leader. And that is the skills, the principles you learn, and the ability to exercise that with other people before you are let loose inside the organization. It's a good way of finding out who is good and who's bad. It's a filtering process too. But it is certainly an advantage, and it's an advantage for you because if you inherit these people, regardless of the rank they come in at, they will have gone through this process where they had been taken away and given dedicated training, not just at management, but also at leadership. And we have always regarded leadership and management as two entirely different skill sets. You can teach someone to be a manager, but teaching someone how to be a leader is harder. So I would say that inspired leadership is a rare quality in my experience. Person who you would say, I would follow this person into battle. That person who you had absolute trust, faith, and confidence in, who you would follow regardless, no matter what the situation. That is inspired leadership. And there are very few people, I believe, who actually have that quality. But a lot of people are able to lead at a time when it is required. And as I said, I've worked for some people who have been inspired leaders. There is this adage in the army that says, men will follow this officer out of sheer curiosity. That's not leadership. That's people who are just curious as to what this guy is going to do next. A true leader is someone who instills that faith and belief in you, and that you really want to be part of what they want to do, of what they're trying to achieve. And you see that in business, and you see these people, and they are truly impressive. I mean, phenomenally impressive. And it's not because they make money. It's because they are genuinely good at doing what they are. And it doesn't matter whether it's a big business or a small business. You find them, and you know when you walk in, and I know this as a consultant, when I walk into a company, you feel it. You just feel the atmosphere, and you know what you're dealing with. I'd also say, please don't equate military rank with a leadership ability. As I said, not everyone has it, not everyone gets it. We do need people in the armed forces who will go on to become managers, and they are managing the business at a very high end. It's a multi-billion pound business, the defense budget, and it's got to be managed. I do wish we brought in proper managers to do it rather than do it ourselves, but that's just the way it is. So don't equate rank with ability. It's not an equation. There are junior leaders who are absolutely brilliant. And it always worries me when people use their rank in the belief that somehow that makes them better, and it's not the case. I think, as I've always said, I only ever got to Brigadier because I hung around long enough and they didn't know what to do with me, so they promoted me. So I don't have any principles for leadership, but I do have some observations. And this is from my time in the army and understanding how the dynamics work, because you rely on everyone else. And there are sort of awful phrases about, you know, would you trust this man with your life, and will he trust you with his life? But actually, that's what it boils down to. So my first observation would be, know your people, but don't feel you have to be known by them. If you're the leader, you should know everyone who works for you. And that includes the person who cleans your office. I've always made it a habit of understanding who cleans my room, who cleans the office that I work in, the guy who's the security guard, the person who everyone just walks past, because that person makes a difference to your life. And if it makes a difference to your life, then that person is important to you. I mean, how many times have you had a business meeting where you said, right, okay, we must impress them. We'll need to have this place cleaned up. Clearly, that person is more important than you ever realized. The person who you probably don't know very well. Get to know them, because then they will feel part of the team. You're beginning to grow a team and you're showing that kind of leadership skills. They are vital to you. You just don't realize it. When I say don't be known by them, that's very much a military thing. I would know all my soldiers, their marriage, their children, their which football team. And when you command the Royal Hind Fusiliers, it's a 50-50 choice. You understand all that, but they don't need to know that kind of detail about you. It's a bit of air of mystery. That sometimes can help. The next observation is always listen. I've always been surprised where the best solutions or the best advice has come from. It comes from probably some of the least expected areas, and that's always been good fun to discover. And that is why in the military, when we are trialing new equipment, we don't give it to the intelligent people to go away and have a look at it. We give it to the people who are actually going to use it and say, how does it work for you? And they are the ones who will come up with suggestions and solutions to the problems that people have been scratching their heads to try and resolve. They know a lot. They see everything. They're watching everything from where they are. And I think that is that's really helpful, and they can be really perceptive. Next one is develop your team. Avoid groupthink. The number of times I have sat at meetings, and this is one of the problems the military always has. We tend to be very like-minded because we've gone through all that to train together. We've been taught the same stuff. We think the same way, and you end up with groupthink. And that is a real problem. So when I say encourage diversity, this is not me being woke or trying to be politically correct. You need to have a team that thinks differently. Otherwise, you're just going to all agree with each other, and you probably won't make the progress you want. I'm not saying get the cantankerous person or the person who's blatantly rude onto the team. The diversity is there to enable you to have breadth and depth of understanding and seeing perspective on all your problems. Next observation is be consistent. I've seen commanders who have been who are brilliant, but they wear their heart on their sleeve too much, and they've been brilliant, and then something happens and they are down in the dumps, and the whole world knows. I worked for a brigade commander who definitely had his heart on his sleeve, and he had some good days and he had bad days, and we all enjoyed the good days, and the bad days, the atmosphere was not good. And it was just like that consistency. When he was good, he was brilliant. When he was bad, it affected the entire team in a negative way. He was the leader, and therefore we relied on him. And when he was down in the dumps, it wasn't working for us. Remember, my next observation was remember a willing worker who is valued is always going to be better to you than a pressed man. This is a history of the Royal Navy, who press gangs would go out and find the drunks around the harbours, have you drag them on board ships. When they woke up, they were out in the channel somewhere as pressed men. Clearly not people who wanted to be there. They were not willing, and therefore the lash was the only way to keep them in order. We've moved on from those days. Well, I hope the Navy's moved on from those days. I'm sure they have. But anyway, but remember that someone who's willing to work for you is going to be better than someone who just turns up to get their pay. And that is all about, my next observation is trusting people. Value them, and by valuing them, you trust them. You ask them questions. As I said, know all your people, get them involved in the team, and trust them. Go and talk to them. Give them room to grow, allow them to have a say, and delegate to them. Don't cast a long shadow over your teams of people, where they constantly feel that they are being observed and monitored in a way that is negative. The fact that you are always present and they can turn to you for help and advice is what you want to be, rather than the person who is stifling innovation and strangling any new thought processes. Don't fear mistakes. A lot of people will tell you this. In business, it's a pretty tricky thing to do unless you have millions or billions at your disposal, but don't fear making mistakes. Way back when I was commanding the Royal Highland Fusiliers, we were out in the jungle. We were doing an extended jungle warfare training package. And one of my company commanders came up to me and said, I want to try doing something. And this was a major exercise where everyone was being assessed, including myself. So lots of people running around watching and observing. And he said, I want to try a different way of doing this. And absolutely brilliant. Yes, go for it. It didn't work. You know, it wasn't the fault of anyone in particular. It just didn't work. But the good news is the person who was overall seeing this said, do you know, that's one of the bravest things I've seen in terms of a company commander whose future career rests on him impressing me, has deliberately or has done something because he wanted to see if it worked, and it didn't. And I'm delighted to say that that officer went on to command in his own right a regular infantry battalion. He didn't fear making a mistake. He had the strength of character and he had the confidence to do it, and it impressed people. And the good news is we all then had a chance to look at it afterwards and say, right, we won't do that again. And we all benefited from his mistake, and that's the real thing. And I spent a lot of time reading about other people's mistakes, and not because there's any sense of glee. I'm wanting to learn and understand how that mistake was made and why it was made and what they should have done. And the people I really enjoy listening to or talking to are the ones who will put their hand up and say, look, I got this wrong and this is why. And you learn so much from that person, and your respect for them goes up immediately. Explain your decisions. In the military, people think we just bark orders at people because people have this impression of the drill square, and the soldiers spend all day marching up and down with people shouting at them to go left, right, and stop and march and all the rest of it. Not true. I think after I left Santos, I think I'd been on only about 4 or 5 parades, as far as I ever remember. Mainly because I'm not good at it, and people avoided putting me on parade, that's for sure. But we don't just tell people what to do, we tell them what to do and why we're going to do it. So you explain your decision so that they own the problem as well. We're going to do this because, and they are automatically beginning to think, right, okay, I understand this. I hadn't just been told, right, do that. Because if we don't fill in the reason why, because we're human, will come up with a reason was why they're doing it, and it'll probably be wrong, and it'll probably be negative as well, because no one ever tells them anything. And you'll hear this gripe wherever I've been, wherever I've been speaking to people. Hear the gripe that people haven't been told why they're doing something and the purpose for it. So they don't feel involved. They feel as though it's just something they have to do. I've always believed, share that, get them involved, get them to own the problem with you, and encourage them to help them solve it. And I think with that in mind, I think I have seen people grow as a result, as an individual, but also the organization collectively has benefited from it. That they are part of the team. Turning to look at planning as sort of the other category that I've been asked to talk about. I have done quite a lot of planning. I was part of a very small team that spent a year planning the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I've also done a number of reviews of the organization where we did fundamental reviews of the army. Planning is something which I have always done, and I've always enjoyed doing it. Everyone does it. you all woke up this morning and you immediately went into planning mode. What am I going to wear? What am I going to do? I need to do these following events. I'm going to do them in that order because logic dictates that I have to do it in that order, or because of convenience, and then I'm going to do that. You automatically do it. And as a result, people believe that they can plan. And I would say, yes, you understand what planning is, but actually it's one of the least well done things that I've come across. There's also always a confusion between at the top end what a vision is, what the strategy is, what the concept of operations are, and then within that what objectives, aims, end states, ends, ways and means, the way that you unpack the problem and develop your plan so that people can then move it forward. I have read too many strategies, both in defense, which is embarrassing, but also when I've been asked as a consultant to go and look at companies. And you are given the vision statement or the strategy that's been done. Normally, or on one or two occasions, it's been done by an outside agency, a consultancy firm, who are very slick, very, very slick. However, when you strip away what we call the buzzword bingo, they are actually pretty thin gruel, or sometimes, in one case, meaningless. And what do I mean by buzzword bingo? You've all seen it. You've all read a company strategy plan or its vision, and it's full of great, it's going to be a dynamic approach with, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, using lots of great words that actually make you feel good. But when, as I said, you strip that all out, you come across something which actually is pretty basic and not well thought through. So I've always said, whatever you do, you've got to remove all what I would call the guff, all that kind of waffle that people put in there. You've got to strip it back to where you want it to be. The military have always taught its people to be concise. Time is normally of the essence. You're under enormous pressure to do something. Get to the point. You get extra marks for being concise because it demonstrates clear thinking, your focused thought process and your aims, and it gives people a clear route of where you have to go and why. And I see people's strategies, and we're going to be the most dynamic organization. And you turn around and give that's lovely, but I'm not sure that actually helps anyone. Anyone who doesn't want their company to be a dynamic organization clearly shouldn't be in that business. We all want to be dynamic organizations, or part of one. Which leads me on to a comment that when I was a very young officer working for a general who was very patient with me, and thankfully so, because I learned a lot from him. He would write, when I was writing briefs for him in the Ministry of Defence, he would write GOBO in the margin, which stood for glimpse of the blindingly obvious. Don't tell me, don't waffle at me, don't waste my time reading things which are blatantly obvious to me. I don't need to know that. Be precise. Saying the enemy has tanks is like saying the sea has fish. It's not particularly helpful to anyone. You really need to own the detail. And I think that's where a lot of the plans that I come across, people don't own the detail. They don't know how to get under the skin of the problem and really get stuck into it. So the general would say, don't tell me what I already know. Tell me what I need to know and why I need to know it. Yeah, the enemy's got tanks. What's the serviceability of them? What is their capability? What is their armament? What is their range? How far can they drive on a tank of fuel? How far can they do this? How far, etc., etc., etc. You've got to get into that detail, because without it, the enemy's got tanks is meaningless. And again, a lot of the times I'm looking at people's plans and companies' plans, and they say things, and you're thinking, that's not good enough. You haven't gone far enough. I need to know more. And certainly in advising, certainly when I've been advising companies, I have a very, I suppose you could say, a very aggressive way of doing it. I was advising companies to really wanting to get stuck in. It's not a gentleman's game business. And nor the military, despite us being officers and gentlemen. It's definitely not a gentleman's business, because your job is to defend your country in the most positive way, which tends to be aggressive. So you end up teaching people to be aggressive, people who want to go out and get it. And that's the important thing. So go out and get something. And you're saying to people, you're trying to compete with this other company, and you haven't examined them in sufficient detail. Montgomery, when and he's not one of my favorite generals, but Montgomery at this point was right. Montgomery always had a photograph of Rommel on his desk when he was commanding the 8th Army in Africa, because he looked at Rommel and spent his entire time saying, what are you thinking? What are you going to do? He got under the skin of Rommel to understand how the man thought and operated, so that he could always be one step ahead of him. If I do this, what will Rommel do? He will do this or this or this, right? In which case, I will prevent that from happening by getting around him, and therefore keeping him on the back foot. And that is how you are competitive in business. You keep the opposition on their back foot the whole time. That's how you win wars. And that it's not all about, we've got a bigger army. It's actually, we are able to get inside your decision-making process and get through and beyond you. So the planning process is very mechanical. The steps that we teach and advise people are designed to dismantle the problem and look at it from every conceivable angle. You've got to identify the risks that exist and then develop the plan that achieves your objectives. And you've got to think of the problem from the opposition's point of view as well. And that requires quite a lot of research. So out here in the Gulf, advising the Qatari government, we spent a lot of time looking at the problem from the perspective of the other people, to help them understand what they're likely to do, and also to understand innovation, and also get them to embrace innovation in order to achieve what they want to do. Thinking outside the box, favorite phrase in the military, think outside the box. Basically, don't approach the problem in the same old way. It's unhelpful. And you're trying to get people to think outside that box the whole time. And finally, horizon scanning, which again, I was always surprised during the Brexit debate how people were umming and ahhing. It was, people said, oh, it's going to be the biggest train crash. It was a train crash that had been advertised and known about for years. There was no excuse for people to get caught out by it. People who just wait for it to happen to them are never going to survive. You've got to take ownership and drive the solution in order to succeed. And I was asked to go and help a company down in London who were looking at Brexit, saying what to do. And it was obvious what was going to happen. We didn't know the finer details, but we probably didn't need to know the finer details. We knew what was going to happen when the United Kingdom left the European Union, and you then had this issue about moving goods across the channel. And so the company, having scanned it and looked at the problem, actually bought 2 factories in Europe, kept the brand and the brand name, but used them as a means of being able to carry on operating inside Europe, which Brexit had no effect on. It was blindingly obvious. And I say that because right now, as we're horizon scanning, the possibility of Scottish independence requires people now to start thinking about what they should be doing. It's a planning process where you think through what could happen. And for businesses, the financial risks are the bit that matter the most. And I think people should now be working towards that quietly. So very happy to take questions on anything. and very happy to talk about examples of things that had happened in various countries where I was operating as part of the discussion. So if I hand back to Alan.
Oh, thank you very much for those fascinating insights. I like the one particularly about don't cast a long shadow. So if I'm going to do a bit of self-reflecting to take away from today, that's certainly the one that leapt out at me. But no, that was fascinating. Thank you very much. Okay, folks. So I'm Alan Mitchell, and I'm the Chief Exec at Fife Chamber, and I'll be kind of facilitating the Q&A today with the assistance of Damon from East Dunbartonshire. So we are going to use the chat function to take your questions. So please fire them in there, and myself and Damon will constantly monitor them and we'll bring them out as we get them in. A lot of people on the call today, so I hope that means a lot of questions. And to make sure that we can get through as many of the questions as possible, can I ask you to please keep your questions short? So no War and Peace three-parters, please. We've all sat through one of those meetings where it's come that way. And once Paul's answered your question, I'll move on immediately to the next question. If you have a follow-up, I will come back to you later on as quickly as I can. So if we kind of follow these simple rules, more people will get a chance to pose a question, and we'll collectively learn a lot more of Paul's leadership and business insight. So, and if there are questions that are put into the chat that we don't have time to answer today, Paul has very kindly said that if we forward those questions on to him, he will come back with individual answers that we will forward on to the person who posed that question. So thank you very much for agreeing to that. We've got a couple of questions in the chat already. So I'm going to start first of all with Stuart Rennie, and please remember to unmute yourself before you start speaking. Stuart.
Morning, everybody. Morning. My question, as in the chat, is that, sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback, is that bravery was once described as grace under pressure. Can you give us any examples of good leadership decisions made under pressure?
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Stuart. Do you know, all my examples I have of good leadership under pressure actually comes from junior soldiers. And I have always, I've always regarded our soldiers, our lance corporals and corporals and sergeants as being the backbone of everything we do. But every example I can give you, and there are so many I wouldn't even know where to start, every single one has come from a lance corporal or corporal. So to understand that, a lance corporal would normally be responsible for 3 other people, and a corporal would be responsible for himself and 7. And that is a fighting unit, that's the section. They have these people under enormous pressure and in the middle of a firefight have been extraordinarily brave and have stepped forward as we hoped they would, which is why we had selected them, and have actually taken the fight to the enemy. It's a very military term to say take the fight to the enemy. Basically, they've closed the distance with the opposition and have gone to them, which takes quite a lot of bravery and courage. And I think the best thing about what the military teach, and in particular the army, because it's a very, it's an in-your-face way of having to do leadership. You can't sit back in a chair and think it through. These guys have demonstrated the most extraordinary leadership capabilities, and they have taken their people with them. Now, the way we operate as teams, you know, we work together as teams. We work, we eat together, we sleep together in a non-sexual way. we operate as that team. And you'll find that in the evenings, they go drinking together. And that shows you the strength, the bond of fellowship, which is why there are so many veteran organizations out there, because that bond of fellowship never leaves you. So these guys, they live and work together, they trust each other. And so when the guy who is the leader, who's been selected on the basis of his qualities, steps forward and says, this is what we're going to do. It is not just his training that's done it, it's because he's the right person at the right time to do it. And these are the people who, and I'm out here in Qatar, and I come across quite a lot of soldiers who were in the military, who are brilliant. They are just brilliant. They make the transition across the business really well. So yes, what I would say to you is grace under pressure. Well, I have to be honest with you. It's never been very graceful. It's always been pretty messy every time, Stuart, the people have stepped forward. But by goodness, are they good? And they really are. They are a cut above the average person. And I mean that, I don't mean that in a derogatory term to the average person, but these guys are exceptional. And I would always look to them as being my first choice as for someone who I needed to lead a small team of people, because they're going to do it.
Thank you very much for your question, Stuart, and thank you, Paul. Now I'm going to go on to Scott Dukers. Now, Scott, I think you posed a couple of questions in the chat, so if you can take one, I'll take one of your questions and I'll move on to somebody else, and I'll come back later on to get another of your questions. So, Scott.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thank you. So, sir, you mentioned an individual in your past who, when you used to come in to work in the mornings, you never knew what you were going to get, because he could often be moody and things like that. So quite clearly that person didn't have a very good understanding of his own moods and swings and emotions. So as I've said in the chat, I believe that I believe, and this is through years of development, leadership and management, that emotional intelligence is a fundamental attribute of leadership. Now, the Navy, the Marines and the RAF recognise this, and indeed have been teaching this for over 25 years, and yet the Army won't. Have you any idea why not?
I'll be absolutely honest with you. No, I don't. I don't know why they teach it, and yet, as I mentioned, it clearly has an impact on people's ability to lead effectively or consistently. To be fair, it's consistently. Is emotional intelligence important? Absolutely. Part of leadership is knowing yourself. And again, there are people who are put into a position of leadership who are obnoxious people. They're not leaders because no one likes them. No one's going to follow someone you don't like.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we come across that in business. You will know people who are obnoxious, arrogant, they are self-centered, they cannot reach out to other people because they lack emotional intelligence. They cannot empathize or sympathize. And so they lack that key quality. And so as a result, they're not really effective leaders. They're the sort of person who tells you what to do and then shouts at you for not doing it. But that's because they haven't brought the team together. So yes, the Army should teach it. I don't think they know how to. And that is a fair criticism I level at them. Yes, I do believe that the Royal Air Force are much better, as are the Navy. Can't speak for the Marines. They tend to be so like-minded with the Army that it would blur that distinction for me. But certainly for the Navy and for the Air Force, they manage and teach their people very differently because they're doing something very fundamentally different. But yes, I would agree they are better at it, and the Army should learn a lesson from it.
Strangely, it's actually the Royal Marines who introduced the term into the military in the UK. So, okay, thank you for your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And I think on the same point, I think Damon from Dunbartonshire Chamber wants to just quickly follow up on that, Paul.
It was just an interesting point you raised, Paul, and I kind of wanted to balance that. You talked about you know, your team liking you, which is one thing, but I'm wondering, obviously, there's the other end of the spectrum where, you know, I would say, you know, you can create problems being everyone's best friend, you know, and you're not seen. So I thought it was a really interesting point to get the balance right for being a leader and a manager type thing. So just thought you could respond on that, to that, please.
Yes, you're right. If you try to be everyone's best friend, then it's not going to work. It's very difficult to ask your friend, certainly in the military terms, to ask your friend to go and do something which is could well result in his death. You'll end up finding someone else to do it, and that's not how we operate. It doesn't mean stop you from having friendships, but if you are commanding a team, if you are leading a team, the advice or my observation was, know your people, but don't be known by them, and that builds in the air gap between you and the team. So you know everything about them. You can go around and say, you know, how's your wife? How are the kids? You know, congratulations on your daughter's, you know, piano lesson grade, this, that, and the other, and not surprisingly, your team lost at the weekend because they were playing a much better team, obviously. So your team will always lose. You can have that banter, and you can have that because you know about them and you understand. However, conversely, they don't get to know you. So I was saying, when I went off, I commanded the Royal Highland Fusiliers, who recruit from Glasgow and Ayrshire. And not surprisingly, the choice of football teams amongst the 650 soldiers was either going to be Celtic or Rangers. And on day one, when I was being picked up from the airport by the driver couldn't help himself because he had to know this, because he needed a piece of information that he could then pass around everyone else, because information is power, and because he knows what the boss is like. So he said, "What team do you support?" And I had a moment's pause. I hadn't thought about it before, and I just gave the odd, "Do you know what? I'm not going to tell you, but I'm sure you're going to find out." 3 years later, it was almost a question, at least once a week, people saying, "What team do you support?" But at the end of the 3 years, people were saying, at my farewell, they were very generous, they were very kind. They had this huge farewell for me. And one of them came up and said, "For the love of God, would you please tell us who you support?" And I said, "Okay, well, I'm surprised you haven't worked it out, since my father is the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. Do you know, that kind of rules out one team and puts it more favorable towards the other. Have you?" At which point, half the battalion leapt up saying, "Yeah, beauty." And the other half, well, the abuse was as you would expect it, to be. And it was a fun moment. But actually, it was one of those issues. Football in the army never really divides, strangely enough, because we're such a close team. But it is very easy to pin your colours to a mast because people know you too well, and you create a division. People don't like you because on principle you don't support something, or you don't do this. I've never talked about my politics. I don't necessarily talk about the team. When I was commanding, didn't talk about the team I supported. That's personal. They don't need to know that. They don't need to know about my problems. You know, problems go up. They don't pass them down and share them with everyone else. They have problems. They should, you know, I want them to bring them to me to see if I can help them. It's all part of being responsible for them, being the leader. Please, you know, if you have a problem, let me know. So you create that air gap where the friendship is based on the fact that you help people, whether you're helping them in business to grow as an individual, or you're helping them to do their job better. It's all about helping and always being there as well. And again, I've always said, if you have anything, phone, day or night. You know, I get paid. The great thing about the armed forces, they're paid 24/7, 365 days of the year. And we don't get any overtime. You get paid around the clock. So you're available around the clock. And so that's always been my attitude. If you need something, ask. I'll always be available. And I hope so. Hopefully that gives you an idea.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is David Rankin.
Hi, good morning. Firstly, thanks for your service. I think everybody in the group echoes that. My question's very quick. What methods would you use to improve upskilling within teams within a busy or kind of under fire environment? Obviously, the commercial sector is slightly different. We don't have mortar or bullets raining down on us. However, we do have quite kind of high demanding clients, and I'm just wondering how you kind of move your teams about to fit into different roles, different positions from what they're initially trained to do.
We've always had the luxury in the armed forces of being able to take people out of circulation. Much harder in the business community where you are, there's a bottom line and you've got very tight margins. It's very difficult to extract someone. That's the advantage. And of course, if you're inheriting someone or you're recruiting someone from the armed forces, you're going to get someone who has been removed from circulation and they've been trained how to do something for their next job. And we do more and more of that now than ever before in other areas. So we now take officers who are what we call middle management, so the majors. And it was something which I had designed as part of the restructuring for the armed forces, or for the army in particular, where we take them out of their environment and we want to put them into a business environment. So we found companies who would happily take them on. And they went out into business. So we had one officer who we lifted out and we put him into BT because we wanted to understand how business worked. Now, you'll have a view on how successful BT is or not. They didn't know what to do with him because he doesn't know much about how the business works. So they put him in charge of a small team who had to go and do a bid for Manchester. What they weren't expecting was for him to win the bid, because they had given him that project because they simply didn't know what to do with him, parked him. But he then created the team. They went in and Manchester gave BT the contract. At the end of his time, we had sent him there for 6 months to learn how business works and bring the best bits of business back into the armed forces, bring it back into the army. They offered him a job. Part of the risks in this is that the number of people we've sent, we lose about a third. They go to a company, whether it's a bank or a business, and they hold on to them because clearly they pay better than the armed forces. It's a risk worth taking. But we've had the opportunity of taking people, extracting them from what they've been doing and retraining them or developing their skills. Within a business, it is quite difficult. People are having to do it in their own time. Personally, I would recommend certainly to medium and large companies to actually invest in their people. What you get, the dividends you get in return are worth every penny you spent and the time when they weren't working for you directly. So invest in people, send them out to other organizations, or get them trained up and give them new skills. If you can afford to do it, it's almost a no-brainer, I would say. But that's because I've seen it work and work well. And so it would be a recommendation I always made, but I understand it's not always possible.
Thank you, David. Next up is Neil Beattie.
Good morning, Brigadier. Thank you for taking the time to present today, and thank you for the Chamber for organising this. How have you found the transition to civilian life yourself, and how have you been received by civilian companies in your consultancy capacity?
Okay, that's one of the best questions and the hardest to answer. I think, like most people who leave the armed forces, you spend at least a year out in the wilderness trying to work out who you are and what you're capable of doing. And we've all heard of that great success story, the person who stepped out of the armed forces and stepped into a fantastic job that paid gazillions and they were a great success. We've all heard the stories. I haven't yet met the person, but I've heard lots of stories about lots of people, but have never really met any of them. It is difficult. The transition is difficult. The armed forces train people to be a jack of all trades, the army in particular, to be a jack of all trades, but not really a master of any. And businesses, when looking at people of a certain age, people like myself coming out, because you've not worked in the business environment, you've never had to work a spreadsheet. You've never had to look at profits because you've never had to make money. You've been happy spending it, but you don't have to make it. And that is what makes a business go round. Certainly, if it's a small business, they're looking at you contributing to that. What they don't necessarily see is someone who has just spent, whether it's 10, 20 or 30 years of experience, developing skills, gaining quite a lot of experience in what they're doing and knowledge, and being able to then transfer that skill across into the business environment itself. Because it's difficult for them to see it, because the perception of the armed forces of people who literally march around on squares and shout at each other. Not really understanding that of all the organizations out there, the armed forces are actually are using cutting edge technology. There's a failure to realize that people are dealing with some of the most sophisticated bits of equipment deliberately. A lot of the things we take for granted, like the internet, designed by the military. GPS, your phone, it tells you where you are, you can do whatever you like, designed by the military, for the use by the military. The military were using GPS long before it became common practice for everyone on their phone to have GPS. So people are using equipment and technology which is not necessarily transferred across into civilian businesses just yet. Artificial intelligence, supercomputers. I mean, that's how you crack codes. There is a capability that is not understood because it's not common parlance or common language here in civilian life. In terms of that transition, therefore, you do spend a year trying to figure out what it is that you can do, because you've done quite a lot. But I mean, from my background, I was part of a very, very small team. There's about 6 of us who planned the invasion of Iraq in 2003. We spent about a year doing that planning alongside Americans, and we had a major contribution to it. There are not many civilian companies that are actually interested in invading other countries, and so they can't understand that. So you know how to invade another country, and yeah, we don't do that. Actually, when you're trying to understand it, as I said, when you're doing planning, you get so into the detail so that your plan is better. I remember reading in the papers, because the papers always are good at not knowing the truth necessarily, certainly not military truth. That we were rushing to get the oil wells. And that's true, we were rushing to get the oil wells, but of course the deduction was so that we could then secure our own supply of oil, because we were a country that wanted oil, and this is the only way to do it. The invasion was all about oil. Absolutely not the case. We had learnt lessons from the first Gulf War when the oil wells had been blown, that the thick carcinogenic cloud that's produced, not only is it unhealthy for you, that's obvious, but actually a lot of our equipment that we were using, our top-end technology, is air breathing. The particles from oil fires are so large that actually an air breathing engine, whether it's an aircraft, cruise missile, helicopter, denies use of it. You can't fly through it because the engine's just cut out. So, and that's why Saddam Hussein was burning them. It also negated a lot of our visual optics and equipment, which can see through day or night normal levels of obscurity, but actually, again, particle levels are so thick that it can't see through that smoke. What Saddam Hussein had done in one fell swoop was to remove our technical advantage, and therefore, when we're doing the plan, we had to understand that we needed to, because we were such a small force that was invading, we had to retain the technical advantage at all times, and therefore, to prevent it happening, we had to secure those oil wells, or else we would be in a whole world of pain. We would be outnumbered, and we'd never get across the river, and we would just be, it would have been a bloodbath. That's why we were doing it. You unpack the problem at every single level. You have to understand it. And we were using technology which was new, so we had to go away and understand how that technology worked so that we could then use it as part of the invasion. And some of that is out there in the Chilcot inquiry, and some of it still isn't and won't be until the restrictions are lifted on it. I hope that sort of answered it.
Thank you very much for that. So conscious of the time, so we're going to take question now from Jeremy Parker and then from Alison Henderson, and then we may have to call a halt there. So Jeremy.
Yeah, good morning. You say good leaders at a junior level don't necessarily make good leaders at more senior levels. Despite best efforts to filter, have you ever had a situation where you only discover this after the promotion's been made, and how do you resolve it? How did you resolve it?
Yeah, no, Jeremy, that is, yes is the answer. There's a phrase used in the army, which is he was over promoted. And it's, again, part of the problem is that we're all like-minded people. We tend to be all quite like-minded people because we went through the same training, and therefore we get trained to do the same thing, to think the same way. And as a result, when it comes to promoting people, there is a risk that you promote people in your own image. It's a pretty fair criticism, but I think that applies across the board. It would apply into business as well, where you tend to look at people who look like you, and not physically look like you, but are like you, and overlook the person who's different. Remember when I said, when you have a board meeting or part of a team, you've got to have diversity. The person who always questions you is probably your best friend. You just don't realize it because they're the ones that keep you true. And if you can't answer the question, then you shouldn't have been posing the solution in the first place if you can't stand up to the criticism. So if you do over promote someone, you're stuck with it. In the military, you can't reduce them in rank. You just end up sidelining them somewhere into an area where they can do less damage. In business, it's really difficult to remove people or sack them. So I appreciate it, but yes, you do have that risk. As I said, the person who is like the captain of the school rugby team, you know, the guy who got all the good girls, aged 18. Hate the guy. But he was really, really good. But actually, business was not for him. He showed leadership on the park, but that's because it was very particular. In the business he went into, he couldn't transfer that skill set across. Partly because he didn't understand the business. And knowledge of your own business encourages people to understand that you know what you're doing and give you more trust, and therefore you get greater responsibility and you can grow as a leader. For people who you have accidentally promoted, I'm afraid you end up with someone who you have to employ productively, but finding that productive job for them. Actually, they'll probably tell you what they're going to be good at doing. Listen to them. One of those guidelines. Listen to what they've got to say. And actually, you may have discovered you've tried to promote them to do the wrong thing, when actually promoting them was the right thing. You just put them in the wrong place. You had overestimated their ability in some area, but they could do good somewhere else. And I've seen people who, frankly, didn't know what to do with them. They said, actually, I've always wanted to do this, found the niche and grew within that niche and carried on promoting, which was lovely to see. So yeah, it's a challenge, but know your people. If you know your people, you hopefully won't make that mistake. But if you do make that mistake, don't worry about it. There's always a solution.
Thank you. Yeah, so don't write them off. Learn lessons for next time. Yeah, good. We could carry on, but yeah, time, as Alan said.
Never write anyone off.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, well, listen, before I pass over to Alison for her question, and Alison's going to follow that by actually doing the close. So I'll kind of sign off now by just thanking you all very much for participating. Lots of great questions there. One or two weren't answered. We will follow up, I promise, on that. But thank you for engaging and following the kind of rules so we got through so many questions. So enjoy the rest of the event, the rest of the day. Alison, over to you for your question and then to wrap up. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Alan. Paul, quite a short question, and I don't know that the answer will be short, but really it's about whether leaders innately have strong intuition, do you think, that helps them take good decisions? Do they develop that skill? Is it something that can be learned?
The best leaders I've come across are the ones who have innovative ideas and have great vision. They're also the people who, having set out the vision, allow the people say, you say, this is what I want to achieve. You then get your people, and I use that great term, your people, that diverse group of people who are part of a team, and let them go away and look at that problem, or look at you, and how they're going to visualize how they're going to realize your vision. And again, I've seen some fantastic people at work, and you're giving, oh, that is just fantastic. And you felt part of it. We've got a problem. This is what the problem is. Tell me what you think. Not, this is the problem. That's the solution. Go away, do it. And you're giving, oh, right, okay, well, okay. So I'm just like, I'm a process monkey. I'll just go in, I'll go write it up and it's sorted. This is someone who comes in and says, look, we've got a problem, people. And this is what I want to do. Or it's not that we've got a problem. I want to grow this business and I want to do this. This is my vision. I want to grow it to here. And the team are so enthused by the vision because it's realistic that actually they want to go and be part of it. And I was involved in another country out here on a project which was looking at a new city that was going to be built. This was going to be a smart city that was going to be built. And the presentation was slick by the people who were doing it, and it was really impressive and all the rest of it. And yet it didn't inspire confidence. And the person who wanted it to happen was going to drive it through regardless. And it was just a case of, right, now that's the way it's going to be. So that's the way it's going to be. And we're going to do it. And why haven't you done it yet? It was almost the daily question. And it was embracing technologies that don't exist. They will, but right now. And therefore it was difficult to know how to build something, certainly a city, for a technology that you didn't quite know what it needed to operate. So it was all bits of, well, what comes first, chicken or egg, chicken or egg. But the vision was actually was too much. But as I said, I've met other people who are brilliant at it, and who allow their people to go away and come up with a solution. And I think, notwithstanding the fact that Amazon is hosting this, but Jeff Bezos is one of those people. Amazon's diversifying. It's getting to the point where we can't survive without them. It's diversifying simply because the man has the vision to say, right, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and he allows space and time to go in and look at it, and it's brilliant. It's not done by many people, but the reason why Amazon is successful is because they're the ones who do it the best. And as long as they continue to do it, they're going to outgrow and outsmart everyone else. And that's inevitable. You watch it. Are they too big to fail? Well, ask Lehman Brothers. They got so big, they didn't even know what they were doing anymore. So in 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed. And that was lack of leadership. It's just, I know, conscious of time, but actually the day after Lehman Brothers collapsed and went into bankruptcy, we got one of the partners to come down to the Army Staff College to speak to the officers about what happened. And the nub of it, and he said it himself, is we didn't actually know what we were doing anymore. We were so big and diverse that no one actually had a clue what's going on. The senior people at the very top who had responsibility, made decisions, didn't understand the technology we were using down the bottom because things were growing. It's exponential growth on technology. They had no understanding of how the algorithms were working that was taking us into massive debt. But when it started going wrong, none of them had the leadership skills. No one understood how to lead the company or the team. They just sat around a board and made decisions. And that's not leadership, that's management. So, and he was, I suppose, on hindsight, now that his company had collapsed, he wished that actually they had some people who were real leaders up there. And so vision, leadership, yes. Yeah, big advocate of it.
Brilliant. What a really good way to finish. Thank you so much. So it's my pleasure to kind of do the roundup and to say the thanks. So a huge thank you to everybody that has signed up from all across these different chamber memberships to come together and take part in today's event. It's been really inspirational and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. A brilliant way to finish a week, wasn't it? A huge thank you to Michelle and her colleagues at the RIFCA. We wouldn't be a set of chamber force leaders and team if it weren't for Michelle and the vision that she had to bring us together. So Michelle, thank you to you. Huge thank you to Jamie from our sponsor Amazon. Really an inspirational employer and a really great leading company in our local area. And you know, I know a lot of people that work there, and I know a lot of people that are very grateful for Amazon being such a great part of our business community. So thank you for the close connection that you've got with Fife Chamber, because if you didn't have that relationship, we probably wouldn't be here either. Our Chamber Force friends. So we are one of the chambers that takes part in Chamber Force, and thank you to Alan in Fife, Damon in Dumbartonshire, and Cara up in Murray. We look forward to doing more events and more activity as Chamber Force, as a Chamber Force team. We've got Alan here today, and the rest of our Chamber Force buddies. Again, you know that we are two halves of a partnership for sure, and it's brilliant to do so much work. So thank you to you for coming along, and to Sarah for the tech and the technology and just making sure that. And we had a little bit of a blip at the beginning where she couldn't get signed into Zoom, and I was thinking, I cannot do this without her. So I was very glad that we managed to get over that. So well done to Sarah and to the rest of the chamber teams that have supported so hard for today's event. And a huge thank you to you if you're sitting there as an employer that is already supporting the armed forces. That is absolutely at the core of why Chamber Force exists, to encourage more employers to be like you and to support the armed forces, to consider to sign the covenant, to consider putting yourself forward for the various levels of employer award that you can do, and just get engaged in supporting the armed forces in the way that fits your business, because you will get such a lot out of it. And I think that's very clear from listening to Paul today, that there are so many takeaways. I sometimes do think that we have two different languages. We do have very different cultures, and I guess what my vision for Chamber Force would be is that we're the translators of all of that. We are the bridge in between the two cultures, but also we make sure that, you know, we're able to kind of teach each other lessons and just encourage employers to really step up and get as involved as they possibly can. So yeah, I think that's all from me, apart from just to give you a bit of a shout out on some upcoming events around and about the chamber world. So Dumbartonshire Chamber on the 19th of May has got a cross-chamber networking session with 6 of the other Scottish Chambers of Commerce. So links in the chat. If you're not already signed up to that, please have a look at it. Fife has got a session on the 10th of June, and that's their chamber chat with Will Dowson, who's from the Bank of England. And that's always really interesting. You get to hear what the bank is thinking about the economy. And we had a really great chat ourselves in our chamber this week with Will, where he was talking about COVID and Brexit and the outlook for the economy. So definitely would encourage you to sign up to that. And then our chamber, a week on Tuesday, I think it is, 14th of May, we have got a great session with Al Maktoum College and one of their speakers who is going to be talking about being a learning-driven organisation. So I guess, you know, another of my takeaways today is that you never finish learning. And I would say I've thoroughly enjoyed learning more about Paul and the world that he's come from and what you're doing currently and all of those leadership thoughts. It's been really brilliant. So enjoy the rest of your Friday and enjoy the weekend when it comes. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody.